Awesome. Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this tutorial on the Vistorian. Thanks for joining us. This session is recorded and you can watch this online later. So we are here for about 1 to 2 hours of a tutorial on the Vistorian, which is a tool that we're building at the University of Edinburgh and with our collaborators at INRIA, at Microsoft Research, and some other partners in Europe and the US. Part of the Vis Hub in Edinburgh, which is the research group at the University of Edinburgh. We're doing lots of research on visualizations, on storytelling, on sketching, on visualization technique, on visualization literacy, on immersive analytics and VR and so on and so on. If you're interested in that, you can find more out about us on this URL, visualinteractivedata.github.io. So today we want to talk about networks. And networks like these, which are familiar to, I guess everyone has seen these graphics before, and I assume that you're experts, that you're doing your own network analysis, network visualizations. And what you see here is one of the a social network that we have been working on with collaborators in history, which is a historical networks that represents letter correspondences between merchants and people in medieval France. So each of these dots in this network is a person, and these kind of relationships between them, they designate letter correspondences. So we have different colors for different types of letters that have been written. For example, these are letters about finances. I think those are the red ones. We have letters about family relations. We have letters about business opportunities, and so on and so on. And the historians are interested in understanding how these social network evolved, of how relationships played together with business and finance, and how people have been supporting each other, and how they grew this network in this time in the 16th century in France. Now, what you see here is this network, and a lot of the stuff that I'm telling you is actually hidden in a way. It is not really shown. These temporal aspects are not really shown. There is no space in this network representation. We don't know where these people are. We don't know when these letters have been written. We don't know, we can't see how this network evolves over time, for example. And in fact, the problem is that this is not the network, it's just a representation of a network. Because all these stories that I'm telling you, all these changes, all this information is not shown in this picture. And in order to reveal these changes, geography, multiple types of relations, and so on and so on, we need visualizations, visual representations for networks. And if you think of visual representations of networks, you can think of this as these node link diagrams. We call them node link diagrams because they have nodes and links, and that's effectively this diagram. But you can also think of others like adjacency matrices, for example, of which I will speak a little bit later. Different representations, different visual encodings inside these matrices. We can use transparency for different links. We can use width of the links. We can use curved links eventually to show flows in networks. We can use animation and multiple representations to show changes over time. We can even use space-time cubes to represent changes in these networks, and many, 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 many more. So when I'm showing you these representations, I want to just give you a little bit of a preview of what I'm going to talk now in this first hour about different types of representations for networks. So these node link diagrams are just one representation. And even though these ones, they don't look like networks, they're very powerful empirically investigated representations for networks that can help you solving tasks, understand your network, finding clusters, understand temporal change, understand geographic representation, understand different weights of links, and so on and so on. And there are tools out there that can support you as an analyst or domain expert in understanding these networks. NodeXL might be familiar to most, has been around for a couple of years. It recently switched to a paid license. It is kind of a plugin for Excel where you can load your data table into Excel with your data and then represent, visualize this as node link diagrams. Jeffy is another tool that most of you, I guess, whoever started visualizing networks, that's probably the main tool to start. It's really nice for large networks, and it has a force-directed layout and can visualize you the network again as a node link diagram. It can also do some of the clustering and highlight these clusters, and you're going to find these Jeffy networks in lots of publications, lots of cover pages. Palladio is another tool that is created by Stanford Center for Digital Humanities, which can visualize a network on a map. So you have these individual dots and then relate them. Now, our tool, so these tools are available there. If you haven't tried them, try them. I'm really curious about your experience with these tools. Now, why are we building a new one? In a way, the Vistorian is also providing an open set of network visualizations like those tools as well. But there are a couple of differences, and then that link this Vistorian into multiple representations, because those tools that I've just shown, they mainly rely on node link diagrams. In a few minutes, I explain you some of the problems with node link diagrams, why we need these other representations that I've shown you in the slide before. So the Vistorian is really a research project that is building slowly over a couple of years, and we have new funding now that we can extend this. And that's why we're running this workshop now, to see where we can go with this project and to see how that links into your agendas and your problems and trying to solve your problems. But long story short, what we are aiming to do with this Vistorian is providing a set of visual representations, node link diagrams, matrices, maps, temporal visualizations, and some others that we're currently developing for free on the web, so that you can use them for your own research. And there are a couple of other, so one of the aspects that we're focusing on is these multiple representations, and other aspects is interactivity. So we're looking into visualizing networks with time, geography, multiple links, and therefore we need interactivity to explore these networks. So rather than in Jeffy just creating a static representation that you can print or so, we want you to explore, investigate these networks using interactive techniques. And that's also why we're running this demo, to show you how you can use these interactivity. Now, again, what we're focusing on is multiple links between nodes. So for example, you have letters between people, and you may have many different letters. Then each of these letters is going to be represented by one line. For example, if we're in this node link representation, we have different types of links. We can color them, different link weights of how much you like a person, or you can also say how many letters you have written. We have focus on geography and on time. And this all is kind of, let's say, surrounded by what we call now Vistorian Labs, which is kind of the research corner of this Vistorian project. So again, the Vistorian is a university project, it's a research project, where we as researchers are really keen in having, connecting to you. So on the one side, of course, this is just free and you can use it. On the other side, we really would be interested in working with you to help you create your networks, to provide you with new visualizations from our own research. We want to provide you with training, because we think it's very important that there is a resource where you can learn about these visual representations, especially if they are exotic, like the adjacency matrix or specific map visualizations. So, and we want to kind of push this idea a little bit. On the other side, we're super interested in potential issues that you find. Of course, if these are bugs, please send us a message. If you think that certain things don't work, if you have suggestions of what we could do in terms of UI or visualizations, if you see a nice visualization, please get in touch with us. We're really interested in understanding the world outside, if you will. We're also interested in your real world problems. So each time I'm running these workshops, I come across 50% of the participants in these workshops have some sort of problem that hasn't been solved in research yet, which is frustrating on the one side, because there is so much research in network visualization, and on the other side there is no solutions for these individual problems, and you're going to be surprised how limited all those visualizations are that we have. Of course, the ones in Vistorian, but also the ones in other tools, or even in the research literature, even though every year there are at least 10 to 20 papers on network visualizations coming out in the visualization communities. So don't be afraid of telling us about your issues, your specific problems of what you want to see in the network, what you want to explore, what you're interested in. And we're super interested in if we can help, or if we can't help, then see how we can push the research agenda. Okay, enough about Vistorian Labs so far, just to kind of frame this a little bit of what is our research interest in this tool. So the outline for today is that about in the next hour, I will talk a little bit about network visualizations in general, of what are these different views that I'm talking now, matrices and maps, and what is all this stuff. I want to then walk you through the Vistorian of how you can use the Vistorian to visualize a network and explore a network. And then I'm going to briefly explain you how you can format the data. That is, what kind of tables do you need to provide the Vistorian with. And you're going to see it's a bit tricky to understand in the first place, but once it's working, it's very fast. And the next time you prepare a network, if you know that you're going to work with the Vistorian, you're going to keep them in such a nice table format already. And again, it's nothing individual to the Vistorian. Tools will ask you the same network, the same table, basically. We have time for a bit of Q&A, and then we're going to go into a little break, probably 5 minutes, and then go into the tutorial, which is run by Mashael, which is like a step-by-step tutorial, so you can just click through and follow everything that Mashael is doing. And again, we have time for questions. If you bring your own data, feel free to use this time to try your own data and ask us the questions. We can see what we can answer today. And if not, then just join one of our drop-in sessions on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Not at 4 p.m., but at 3 p.m., which will be staffed by Mashael and or me, and we can help you with your own data. All what I'm saying, or what I've said so far, is also on the website, vistorian.github.io. That's the main entry page. And I'm gonna go to the website in a few minutes as well. Are there any questions so far? I'm just trying to see if get any major questions in the chat. Any questions about what I just said? No? Okay, good. Give me a second. I can't see the time now because it's full screen. Okay. Okay, visualizing complex networks. Networks are generally understood as any sort of data structure that has some sort of nodes. Sometimes you can call them points. In mathematics, they call them vertex and graph theory. In social sciences, sometimes they're called actors. You call them whatever they want. There's a number of terminology. And between these nodes, we have usually links, which sometimes are called arcs, relationships, connections, flows, different terminology, different semantics, but we want to be very clear here. These links usually, or these networks usually, have attributes. Otherwise, they would just be described as a graph in mathematical terms. And they have attributes such as direction of links, for example. They can have multiple links between the same nodes. We can have link types. We can have node types, whatever attribute you want to associate with the node. We can have also weighted links. And often I get the question of, can I, as a visualization person in teaching and in lecturing, I always get the question, how can I visualize qualitative data? Now, people may have different ideas of what qualitative data is, but I think networks are kind of a qualitative data because there are these structures. It's really about the structure. It's not about quantity in that sense. It's about structure between anything that you may want to understand. Any sort of connectivity. And of course, to make things worse, we can have usually combinations of multiple links, types, directionality, and so on and so on. If you work with social networks, you're well aware of all these concepts. Now, here is again one of these node link diagrams. It's the same network that you've already seen. And we can see a lot of different things. I'm not going into the detail of, I assure that most of you are familiar with what we can see in networks. Central nodes, we can see clusters, we can see these kind of interesting triangle relationships, and you see there's a lot of letters flowing back and forth with these people. We can see specific patterns like fans, which is one node being connected to a lot of peripheral nodes. So there are strong ties between central nodes and so on and so on. It is almost infinite, the patterns that you can spot in such a network. And that's what we call exploration, of having a look at the network, not starting to count nodes, not starting to look into how dense is this network or what's the most central node to everything, but just look at it, see the evolution over time, look at it on a map, see where my nodes are, which countries are, which regions are related, which times are having a burst of connectivity, where is this network very unconnected, and so on and so on. I show you all these in a second in the Vistorian. But one of the problems of these node link diagrams is that as they become large in the networks and they become dense and you have a lot of links, it becomes what we call a hairball, which looks like this because we can't even follow individual links anymore. We may just guess that there are some central nodes, but if I look in this green cluster or this blue cluster, I have really little idea of which node is actually connected. And what's worse is, even if I use coloring to show clusters, my human understanding, my human perception of this graphic will not tell me, or will basically tell me that, is this clustering any good? So this is a problem of these dense networks. Now, luckily, there are solutions for dense networks to make them appear less dense, so to say. And this is where a lot of creativity comes into play, or has been a lot of nice techniques have been invented over the past years. Now, one of these techniques is, which I really like, is motive simplification. If you have a network with such a fan motive, for example, you can imagine you can have 100 of these nodes, which will just appear somewhere in here. There will be a fan with hundreds of those nodes, and they just clutter your image. You just replace them by such a slice, such a pizza slice. It's a fairly simple calculation to do, and this is all you want to really know. If you look at the network, you want to see, okay, there's a fan, that's it. I don't need to see that there are all these individual nodes because there's not so much information. Another interesting thing is if I have two nodes that have a set of connected nodes, like common friends, for example. If this was me, this was you, then those are the people that we both know. They're going to be replaced by such a diamond. And again, if you look at this network and you look for all those patterns and you replace them with a diamond or with a wedge, you can imagine this will free a lot of visual space, and now I can start actually see, does this cluster has more of these type or more of this type, and it frees space for showing the relationships. Now here's a real world example of this one. Those are, I think it's the House of Representatives or it's the Senate in the US. I can't remember which one. And it shows those senators who vote together. We see basically a lot of connections here. We see some central nodes, which is great. But inside here, we know very little. Now, if you replace all the nodes that are connected with each other, by one of these shapes, which I don't know the name of these ones. If anyone has an idea how we call them in English, I'm happy to learn. So basically what the algorithm is doing here is replacing all nodes that are mutually connected by such a shape. So that means basically, if I look at this images, I know that all the blue nodes, they all are connected. There's not a single blue node that is not connected to any other blue node. That's what I can see now from the symbol. And if I look at the red cloud, basically, I see that it's not really the case for the red senators, basically. There are two big clusters, this one and this one. Every node in this cluster is related to any other node here, and here it's the same. They're strongly connected, but not each senator from here is also connected to these one. And then you have a few outliers that are not really part of any of these clusters. So from an information perspective, right, this gives me a very particular view in the network, a lot of information that I can read out of here, which is complementary to the information that I can see in this left representation. Now, I'm not saying this is better than this one, because here I can see other things. I can see the number of nodes, for example. But here I can make very specific judgments about the mutual connectivity of these nodes. Any questions, just drop them. We have other ways. I don't know why this slide is here. It should not be. If my network is very dense, let's say I would just get one of these shapes, then I may want to use a matrix, for example, because a matrix is also called adjacency matrices are really powerful in showing network connections. Now, if you've never seen a matrix, let me walk you through this, and let me explain you how we read such an adjacency matrix. First of all, a matrix is like a table. We have nodes in our network are rows. Here we have each row is labeled with a name in our network, and I believe this is the social network from Les Miserables, which groups people by whether they're on the same chapter or not, and how they are connected. So we have a row for each node in our social network, and we have a column for each row in our social network. And whenever they are connected, we just make a small mark inside the specific cell, okay? So we see that this node, this first node, has one connection with this node, a point here, and Madame Thénardier, and then we have this person. So this node has three connections, 1, 2, 3, okay? And you can go through like this, and you're like, okay, what is Benjamin trying to sell us here? This is looking like a Miro or something. Can't really understand this. You certainly don't want to go through the rows and the columns and try to see, are they really connected? The problem here is you're not seeing any high-level pattern. You're not seeing any information in that sense. And ignore the color for a second, in case you're asking what the color is. Now, the good thing about it is that we can potentially put a mark in each of these cells, okay? So even if this node was related to every other node, there would be no problem in filling this entire table, this entire matrix with small marks, which we can color, for example. That's really great because we're not ending up with something like this, where we don't see anything anymore. We will always see which relations are there. And if the matrix is to 50% filled, then we can very surely say, okay, this network has a density of 50%. 50% of all nodes are connected to each other, which is some sort of information. So that's the great thing about these matrices. We just need to solve the problem of this being very, very crowded. Now, there are algorithms to help you organize and order these matrices. Think of the same thing is actually true for a node link diagram. If you have this diagram, there was an algorithm in the background that optimizes the node position. If you would just tell the computer to render these nodes and links with random positions on the screen, you would get something like this. But there is a force-directed algorithm in the background that optimizes the nodes and using some concepts from physics and springs and so on and so on to kind of put the network in the right, the nodes in the right position. And the same we can apply to these matrices. And once this is done, so I'm just showing you that these two nodes are connected, which is quite hard to see. But once this network is optimized, not the network, sorry, the matrix, once the matrix is optimized, we end up with something like this. And now you see patterns emerging. You see that there are these blocks coming up. And you see the blocks have different sizes, and they have different, let's say, opacities. Like this one has a little bit of opacity here. This one it has a bit of opacity here, but this one is quite opaque, and so on and so on. So this ordering, I don't go into details how this ordering works. We have algorithms for this, and feel free to ask me if you want more information about this. But once it's done, it's really important to understand and to read these matrices. And what we can see here, for example, is that each of these blocks is representing a cluster of nodes. So we have this cluster, again, ignore the colors for now, with a cluster that contains all those nodes here. And all these nodes are, they are a cluster because if you follow this node, it's connected to all these nodes. This node is connected to exactly the same nodes. This node is also connected to the same nodes. This one is also connected to the same nodes, and so on and so on. And you basically end up with a very dense cluster. Now, the good thing is that we also see which nodes are not connected. So for example, we see that this node, Prouvière, is not connected to Mabeuf because the cell is empty. So we can see that, oh, in this cluster, almost every node is connected, except that these nodes here, these two, and this one, they're not connected. And Marius and this guy is also not connected. So it is kind of in, this is information that you would not see in any node link diagram to understand clusters in detail. And if you follow this, you can look at the other clusters. You can see how dense they are, how much connected nodes are, and where are their specific outliers. So this is one of the patterns that we can see in matrices. And another pattern in matrices that we can see is these rows that are having a lot of cells. So Valéjean, for example, who's one of the main characters in Les Misérables, is connected to a lot of different nodes. So if you follow this row, right, he's connected to this one, he's connected to the one next to it, and so on and so on and so on. And he's also part of this green cluster. So this is kind of a second important pattern that we can see in adjacency matrices. And again, think of that this matrix could be complete. Valéjean could be connected to every node in the network, and we would immediately see that because we can just check the row. We can count, or we can visually see how many nodes this person is connected to or not. And if this matrix is becoming very dense, then we still can see all those patterns. Now you may ask, well, in social networks, social networks can be very dense, but there are a lot of other applications outside social science, in biology, for example, and in brain sciences, where these matrices are fully connected. If you think of connectivity among your brain regions, because your brain regions are constantly talking to each other, then you end up with a fully connected matrix where it's a very, very powerful method. And if you have such data, Vistorian will also help you. So just compare the two side by side again. The colors changed a little bit. It's because I took these examples from the internet. Again, we see this node with a lot of dots on one row and a lot of dots in one column. This is the central node on the left side. We see this one cluster here, it corresponds to this one. And if I ask you, could you say which nodes are not connected here, you would struggle to find this information. But here you could clearly see how dense the cluster is, how big the cluster is. You can even see this cluster is a little bit bigger than this one, is bigger than this one, which is all hard to tell in a network in the node link diagram. Now, of course, matrices are not the best visualization for networks. It's always complementary to other visualizations. For example, they are good for understanding clusters, for finding missing links in clusters, for finding highly connected nodes, and for estimating the edge weight, for example, which we have encoded by the transparency here. So it's quite simple or easy to see the weight of these links. In the node link diagram, you have to check the size of these links, sort of the width of these links, of these lines, which is visually a little bit harder and it requires more of your attention, whereas here you can just spot these patterns immediately. But of course, in node link diagrams on the left, it's easier to follow paths. So to see how do I get from this node to this node, it's easy to see that you need to go through this node, which is kind of pain if you want to do the same task in a matrix. It might also be easier to find outliers because they're always appearing at the periphery here, which is a bit harder here because they're not popping up so much. It's basically the empty rows, you know what I mean? And you can find disconnected components is also easier in node link diagrams because they will just be on two parts, two sides of the screen, so to say, which is hard to see in matrix because you cannot follow the paths and see these connected components. So the lesson here is that matrices are really powerful for specific tasks, specifically especially for dense networks, but they're still complementary to adjacency matrices. And this is kind of was one of the main motivations for us to try to develop the Vistorian, because we wanted to bring these matrices, make them usable. And those two at the same time. I show you that to you as well. Now, once you have matrices, and once you know how to use matrices, and I should ask if there are any questions, actually, because for some people, this is super easy to understand matrices right away. Others have issues understanding it, and I'm happy to help you. Just drop your questions in the chat if you have. Now, once you have matrices, you can do lots of cool stuff. And I'm not saying cool, actually, I say powerful. Because you can, for example, link matrices. Now, this seems a little bit complicated, but it is actually a hybrid version of node link diagrams and matrices. So here, it's a visualization of research groups. So this is Park. This is CMU. This is a group led by Batterson, who is a researcher. This is another research group by another researcher, Ben Schneiderman, if you know him, the Berkeley research group. So each of these matrices are a group. And yes, the assumption here is that a research group is a densely connected network. People in this group, they always work together, or in many cases, they work together. So you want to represent them as a matrix. But you don't want to show the entire network as a matrix because it's going to fill your screen and it's going to look quite empty in many cases, like this one. Now, that's really cool with this node trick technique, that you can just show the dense components as matrices, and then link the few nodes that have connections among the groups. So you say, for example, the Berkeley group is working with this person from Park, but is not working with any of the other research groups. And here we can see Ben Schneiderman is heavily working with this research group, with this research group, and with this research group. So it's really, really powerful, interesting technique because it gives you some of the information right away. What are my groups and clusters and so on, but keeps your screen a little bit more tidy. Another thing you can do with matrices is you can visualize information about edges quite efficient. Here's just a graphic of 8 different ways you can visualize weight on edges. So a single value on an edge. You can use small circles and a small or large, squares and size, small bar charts, for example, using transparency. And we ran a study on this as well. It wasn't really super conclusive because it depends on so many different factors, of course. It's just to give you an impression of what we could do and what patterns and how do these different encodings actually can show you the density of cluster or the strength of your links, for example, in matrices. And this is all, if you look at these patterns, it's much more detailed information than when you show the link, the size of the width of a link in a node link diagram. Okay. So, and this is opening up many different possibilities, actually. But let's focus a little bit on multivariate networks now. Multivariate networks are all those networks where we have directionality of links, where we have multiple links, where we have different link types, where we have node types, and all sorts of link weight, all sorts of attributes associated to just on top of the nodes and links and the kind of relational topology of our network. Again, matrices, very interesting. We can do compare two networks. So here in this study, we have encoded the difference between edge weights in two different networks. Think of, you want to compare a social network in week 1 and before the lockdown and after the lockdown, for example, and see which relationships have increased, which relationships have decreased or something. And you can try to come up with very sophisticated visualizations inside the matrix cell. So here, for example, the blue one for each cell could mean before lockdown, and the red one could mean above after lockdown. And you could then see where it's increasing, where it's decreasing, and overall where there is an accumulation of increases versus decreases, which clusters have increased weight or decreased weight, and all sorts of information. And again, this design space is huge. I'm not going into detail. We ran different studies and tried to figure out what works perceptually well on large matrices and how to encode all these information for 2 networks, for 3 networks, for 4 networks, for 5 networks, and for time, and so on and so on. Again, it's a lecture in itself. But again, the story is that these matrices are really powerful to show all sorts of information inside a cell. Another relation, another kind of visualization that can be quite interesting for multivariate networks are arc diagrams. In an arc diagrams, we have basically just all the nodes on a line from left to right, and whenever nodes are connected, they're connected by such an arc. Now, it looks a little bit messy at the first place, and for dense networks, again, it will be very messy. But what you can see is, again, clusters of densely connected nodes. You can see very central nodes. In fact, this is the same network, the social network that you've seen, that I've shown earlier on about Les Miserables. So you see again, Valjean is connected to a lot of people, and yeah, you can show link with the weight of these edges. But what's really interesting about them is that you can order the nodes according to something meaningful. You can, for example, order them by alphabet if you want to, and then you can see, are the nodes starting with A likely to be connected to other nodes starting with A, or are they just all connected to other nodes? In a social network, of course, it would be quite random, but if you think of brain regions who are having specific letter codes, then that makes quite a lot of sense, because then you can see if all the regions starting with A are densely connected and the regions starting with the B and so on, how are they connected? You could also order the nodes in your social network by age, for example, by the people in your social network by age. And then you can see, are young people connected to old people, or are young people more connected to young, and so on and so on and so on. So it's an interesting dimension to think about these orderings. I'm jumping over some of these in the interest of time. Again, I'm happy to have more chats on those visualizations and to show more. These are basically representations that show sets of nodes. So here it's friendship groups again, and yeah, sets and nodes, and so on and so on. Temporal nodes, again, I want to go over these visualizations because they're quite, it is a lot of information for just a short time. Pivot graphs is quite interesting. Again, I think I will jump over them. No, I will explain them because they're really an interesting concept if you work with networks, and you will be surprised how powerful they can be. So in these pivot graphs, let's focus at this one example. We have a social network, and we have a couple of female nodes. They're all starting with F, and we have a couple of male nodes here. They're starting with an M, and the male nodes are squares, and the female nodes are circles. And the numbers mean family. So we have females from family 2, and then we have family 1 as well. Now you can create such a network, and this is a fairly small example, but if I ask you, are the males from family 1, are they connected to the females from family 1 more, or are they more connected to female from family 2? That's probably will take you a while to figure out, even though you see all the information, but it's not pretty attentive. Now, what pivot graph does is it kind of aggregates these nodes by attributes, and this is super powerful. For example, what we do here, this is the pivot graph of this example, is that the pivot graph has a node for each combination of attributes in our original graph. So we have here all the males from family 1, 1, 2, 3. Those are all here. We have the females from family 1, which is this person. So that's why it's a small circle. And we see immediately they're more male in family 1 than female. We have here all the female from family 2, which is this. So it's 4. And then here we have the 2 male from family 2, which are those 2. And then the links, what the links show is the overall relations, the number of relations between this set of nodes and this set of nodes. Okay, so here, to come back to my questions, are the male from family 1 more connected to female from the females of family 1 or the female of family 2? And this visualization answers this question very straightforward. Just by looking at this, we can see these are the 2 biggest sets of nodes in my network, and here is how they are connected. And you can also see which of these combinations of attributes are actually available and which ones not. This is just another example of the same representation but for a different network. And I think the idea, I wanted to briefly point out the idea of pivot graphs. So let's have a look at temporal networks, because again, there are many more techniques for multivariate graphs, and I'm happy to answer more questions and try to see if I have a technique that may help you. Dynamic networks are quite complicated. These are all sorts of networks that change over time. Social networks is, again, the prime example where social relationships appear, disappear, break up, clusters emerge, clusters split, all sorts of things. Just kidding. So one of the main, is this playing? No, it's not playing. It's an old slide deck. One of the first techniques that come into mind to visualize changes in our graph is animation. And if this would have been played, you would see these nodes jumping around, because in a force-directed layout, when 2 nodes are connected, they're going to be pulled together. And if the connection breaks, they're going to be floating apart. So if you have constantly new edges coming and edges going in your network, it's constantly changing if you follow such a force-directed layout approach. Now, of course, in reality, everything is a bit more complicated and nuanced, but animation is quite good in showing you there are links coming and going, but it can really disrupt your flow. An alternative are small multiples. Small multiples is taking a snapshot of the network at each time. For example, we have week 1 or wave 2. Those I think are nothing to do with Corona. It's something completely different. I think I would interpret it as weeks. So let's say this is a network of friends in school. This is week 2. This is week 3, week 6, week 10, week 14, and so on and so on. And you have one network at each time. And then you can see whereas my 17 is always a very central node, but node 10 is always here. And then you can make your comparisons and look at the topology at each time step. So for example, here 15 and 10 are not connected, but here they are connected, and so on and so on. So it gives you a high-level topological overview over the network at each time, and you can scale this up for hundreds of small multiples if you can fit them on the screen, or you need to scroll. So there are some issues with that, but it's good for publications as well. It's a static technique. It doesn't require animation. Now, another very common technique for dynamic networks is coloring, where you color the links by the age they have. So if we start the network somewhere and we say, those are my connections at the beginning of my time, and I color them red, and then the ones that are still there at number 2, I color them purple. No, sorry. The purple ones are the ones from here. We see those are the same ones. And then my new edges that appear in step 2, week 2 or year 2 or whatever, I call them red again. So let's say they're hot and then they cool down. And then we can just continue doing this. And the older the links get, for example, they move into the blue. And the fresh links are red and the old links are blue. So I can see where the network is actually constantly changing. So I see here this cluster is constantly changing and evolving. And this one is kind of not apparent anymore at this given time point. So it can give you a really nice overview over the changes in your network and which regions are most affected, which high-level regions are most affected in your network. Now again, we can also use matrices, surprise. This is a technique I also really like. It is showing in my matrix, again I have rows, I have columns. It is showing a small glyph, a small visualization that shows how the relationship between these 2 nodes changes over time. So we have some glyphs like this, for example here. I'm not going into details, I just want to show you what information you can extract from such a representation. This is where the relationship is stable. This is a relationship that is a bit wacky. And this is a relationship that is really almost non-existent. And by looking at all these glyphs, you can try to understand that which nodes are highly connected, like these ones, which ones are less connected, and so on and so on. Again, you can do very detailed analytics, analysis, focus on specific relationships, as well as seeing the high-level picture of where there are clusters and so on and so on. Again, this is information that is impossible to show in simple node link diagrams. And eventually, the last technique I want to talk about time is time arcs, which is basically like a timeline from left to right. And then we see all the nodes are as lines, basically, as rows. And whenever they're connected, we can create one arc from one day to the other. So for example, we see that this person, Marie Boucher here, is in 1661. This is again this medieval social network about merchants. She's writing a letter to Francois Trousseau, 1661 here, and then over a year or so, nothing happens, and then again she sends another kind of letters to these persons here. Today we would probably say she's spamming around. So again, in 1664, she sends a lot of letters to other people, probably asking for money or for sort of any sort of things. So we can see kind of the pace of connectivity in our network. We can see where this person is sending letters to. And we can even see here, this is quite interesting, Marie Boucher and Hubert Antom are two central actors in this network who have a lot of exchange. And you can see this here, that from 1667 on, they have frequent exchange for about 5 years to 1676 is, I think, when one of these actors dies. So we can see there is a constant exchange. We can analyze or understand and explore these patterns of dynamic connectivity. You can also see, yeah, frequency, pacing, number of letters, and so on. It's a quite powerful technique as well. Okay, looking if there are any questions or reactions. This is the last little bit of networks that I want to talk about because they are all kind of related to what we do with Vistorian, is geographic networks. Now, geographic networks are all sorts of networks where you have geographic information. Some people talk about flow networks, geospatial temporal, geospatial networks. This is a very old example, probably the first network visualization or geographic network visualization that I know. And we have usually nodes with their specific regions, and then trying to curve the edges around each other so that we can remove the overlap. Because the problem in geographic networks, obviously, is that the node positions are kind of given by the geography of the node, the position of the node. And then we need to deal with a lot of overlap and clutter. And I show you one technique that we try in Vistorian to solve some of these issues. Again, you can solve some of these issues by trying to find a trade-off between your geographic position and your actual topological, your topology information. They can be deforming techniques, or you can just say, well, if my geography is like approximate, if I'm just talking about countries, you know, I don't need to show all this map. I could just put the countries in a circle like this and say, here are the European countries, the African countries, and kind of connect them like so. Again, to show which continents, countries are highly connected, and so on. If you want to know more about this, we're having a survey now online where you can browse all these techniques that exist, about 70, 60, 70, 80 techniques on geographic networks. Okay, let's wrap up here a little bit on this high-level overview. The main take-home message is there's no single view that fits all your tasks. And there exist many, many more techniques that I could have gone through today. Again, I'm happy to give more information if you want to. But it's important to know that if I have a specific task, if I'm looking at my network and I'm like, how about this? Then there might be a technique out there that can help you. And it's always good to have a couple of techniques that you can try and say, well, if I don't see it here, maybe I see there, or maybe I see there. And to use the information from these techniques in your understanding of the data, for example, a matrix to look at the clusters, and a time arc to look at the temporal change, for example. Again, some pointers to literature that I can share with you as well, if you're interested in more of these network things. Now, the second take-home message is that there are so many techniques, but few of the techniques are really, really available and usable. You may see like, oh, this is an interesting visualization that Benjamin was talking about. Where can I use it? And the answer in 50% is, maybe of the cases is, ask the authors, try to Google the techniques, try to find the paper, and ask the authors if you can use it. Because many of these tools are not really available. And that is one big problem to make these things usable, because if we as researchers, we're not providing our visualizations to users, then we will not learn if these techniques are really helping those people. Of course, they are empirically validated in the research environments and with actual users and tasks and so on. But we're not learning which other problems they can solve, what problems really you have. And this, again, all motivated us to create the Vistorian. So we have a brief break. I think I will go through the demo, and then we have a break before the tutorial, because some of you may want to leave and not attend the tutorial. And those of you who want to attend the tutorial, they're welcome to stay. So how do we make use of Vistorian? Before I go into showing some of these visualizations, I want to briefly outline that we need a table. This is, again, this merchant network that I had shown a couple of times. And it is formatted in a table, which means that we have each row in this table represents a link. And this is called the link table format, which is quite central and useful. So each row is a link. And then we have the column basically specifies the information about this link. So we have our one node, basically, node 1, that is connected. Hubert Tom is one of the persons. And Hubert Tom is a Nantes by the time that he writes a letter about commerce to Jacques Yvon, who is in Santo Domingo in the Caribbean. And the letter has been sent on the 3rd of August, 1673. And so we can see we have a couple of links here. And this is data that has been curated by hand by a historian who was spending a lot of time in the archives and putting this information together. So I say more about this later on if you're interested in. Now, what we do then in Vistorian is you upload this data, but the historian doesn't know what these things are. So you need to tell the historian which of these columns it should interpret accordingly, and then you can create a visualization. So I'm going to go there just now. We'll, here we are. You can follow me. I'm just pasting this link here. This is the website that where I'm just going, our website. And you find this Launch the Vistorian button here. You will also find it here. Just clicking there. You can still see my screen. Yes, I imagine you would have otherwise complained. So when you first come to this page, you have a lot of information, which is not so helpful at this point. And you click on My Session, and you will come to a data manager. You call this data view. Just resetting my system so that I can show you how it works. So the first time you see, it just looks empty. And you have a list of networks here and a list of tables that you can keep. And now I want to create a new network to visualize. So I click this new network button. All of what I'm showing you now is, we will go through these things step by step by Michael. I just show you briefly how simple that actually is. I'm now uploading my table, which is this social network that I've just shown you again. So I see this table here, and now I see here are my people, Hubert Tom and Jacques Yvon and so on. And I say these are nodes, source node. This is a target node. So I'm sending letters from here to there really. And then you see this one turns green. It's great. And now I can actually visualize this. I click on the link sorry, on this visualization button, I have, oops, come on. Zoom is somehow hiding things on my screen. So I have all the visualizations here, the node link, the matrix, time arc, and map, which I'll show you in a second. And now I see my network, it's great. I can zoom, I can show the node labels, I can explore them. This is what you would expect from a node link diagram representation. I can also increase the edge gap a little bit, and I see which links have multiple edges. See, we have again Marie Boucher and Hubert Antome. And we can see that they have sent a lot of letters. Remember what I showed you in this time arc representation, that you can see all these many letters between nodes. So I can play a little bit with these visual representations here to kind of make highlight the information that I want, basically. Okay, great. That's very simple. Now let's go back because we have actually more information. We have the type of letter, and I tell the system that this column is my link type. And I have time. So I'm going here. See, this is the time when the letter was sent. I am inputting my date format because that's something that machines are not really good at, guessing what the time format is. So I'm using dd/mm. You can find more information on another website that tells you how you can format any sorts of different date formats. And then I'm just going back to my node link diagram, and I have a couple of more things now. So now I see the colors. The colors show my different types of letters. So the yellow ones are my commercial letters. I see this nice commercial cluster here. I can also just uncheck them to just look at one type at the time. So this is my financial network. This is the family network, the green one. So, you know, filtering and so on and so on. And what we have also seen is the time. So here I have my timeline, and I can just now can see how this network evolves over time. It starts with this guy, Marie Boucher here. There she is. And now she reaches out, creates connections, a lot of financial ones here, asking for money. This is in my personal interpretation, I don't know. And then at some point she meets Hubert Antome here by the 1670s. Yes, and I can just set this differently. Michelle will go through the details again. So I can explore this network through time and set my specific time frame. Talking of time, let's just have a look at this time arc representation here. This is the one that I showed you on the slides. It's just, it's streaming right now. That's why it's a bit slow, and voila. Here we have our time arc network where we can see again all the nodes. And if I'm highlighting them, then I can see these links showing up. I can see here Marie Boucher and Hubert Antome, our old friends. You know, it's just it's echoing what we have just seen in the node link representation, but from a different angle. We see Marie Boucher started right with the finance travail, the work and finance networks, and then she met Hubert Antome here in the 1670s. She has frequent letters with him, and so on and so on and so on. And I can just filter this because it looks quite overwhelming. I totally agree. So let's just look at the letters from Marie Boucher, and that looks actually a little bit more readable, if you will. Again, I can zoom in here. Michelle will show the details. My matrix as well, because it seems like this network is quite dense. And it's not as dense as you may expect, but we can have a look at the matrix to see what we can learn from the matrix. Now, if we zoom in, we see that we can nicely see that here there are 4 different links between Marie Boucher and Uberon-Thom. So 3 green links and 1 commercial one, so 3 times family and 1 commercial one. We can see all these other dots and so on and so on. I can also, because again, this is a view that is very, I can change the ordering of the nodes, alphanumerical, or by node degree. Node degree is quite interesting because now I have, I tried to order these nodes as I've explained you on the slides actually, I can now zoom in again and see and look at Uberon-Thom, and I see exactly whom this node is connected with. And I see one of these clusters here, these green clusters appearing, lots of nodes related to green, and here lots of nodes related to blue. We had kind of an issue in these days because the clustering, the node ordering that I was explaining you on the matrix on the slides, the package that we're using, the JavaScript library, just had an updated version, and that broke our code just before the workshop. That's great timing. So we're working to get this back, and we let you know all. But this node degree is a very good approximation to understand the density of these networks. So this is great. We have node link, we have matrices, and we have the arc maps, and we can also see them side by side because I guess again the matrix might not be super familiar to most of you. Let's just show them side by side. So here we have again, it's the same network. I'm just using the node degree ordering to show this little cluster here. And as I hover over the nodes, I can see them in both representations, which is very useful because here I'm seeing the central node, Uberon-Thom, and it's this one, okay. Very nice, and now I can see this green cluster here, and now I also start seeing the cluster here. So maybe now I want to focus only on the green network, and already I can see that this is synchronized, these 2 views, and I can do now focus on my time and see how this family network evolved. And I see it always in both representations side by side, so they're synchronized. So I can actually start understanding the matrix and learn the matrix while I'm working with the representation I'm quite familiar with. And lastly, I show you briefly the map. So we can, we know that Uberon-Thom is in Saint-Nicolas and Nantes. And we know that the receiver is at these places, so Santo Domingo here, and for the other somewhere else. So again, we set the specific field, and the Vistorian is now collecting geographic information about these places. So it's asking a web service for the coordinates. The coordinates are not always great because sometimes, you know, there are multiple Parises in the world, and it will just go with its best guess. In this case, it's correct because we're looking really for the Paris in France. But if you look for Paris somewhere else, this might not be correct. But you can just edit these things and add your own coordinates if you wish to. And as soon as this is done, we can go to our map, and we see the full beauty of geographic networks with lots of problems, lots of issues. This is one of our main playgrounds or building grounds just to try to make this more readable. And I'm afraid there are not good techniques to show the deal with the density, but you can already see how France is the center of this network, and how then this network expands into, oh, this is Google Maps, a bit lucky, into the new world. And here we have Auderne. I think Auderne is actually also in France, but the geo system was not really good in guessing this one. What is this city? So, and one last thing here is because you may see that there are lots of nodes at the same location. This is quite annoying. So we have this node overlap function. Let me just show you this a little bit different, which can show you all the nodes in this place. So you can kind of unfold your network a little bit. Again, it's not the ideal solution. We're working on this, but I think it's much better than, it is better than nothing. Let's say it like this. Again, it's not super easy, and the project is not greatly funded for the moment being. So, but you see there is work necessary. Just getting a question here. In terms of use, link leads to Microsoft. What is TOU?
Terms of use.
The terms of use.
Yeah, but I'm just out of curiosity at the bottom.
Oh, I'm going to check this. It's probably because the project started when I was at Microsoft, so. But it shouldn't be.
You know, it's kind of important. If you make something with Vistorian, then what would I do, or what any one of us would do if it wants to kind of demonstrate how something works in Vistorian? That's what I'm asking. So.
Yeah, there's no real problem. I think that the big thing that I should mention is any data that you, that's something I forgot when I was explaining things. Any data that is here is on my browser. It is not, we don't have a data server or something. There are no logins, there's no data server. We're not transmitting any data away from your browser. It basically, if I click this button, empty browser cache, it just all vanishes and it's away. I can show you, for those of you who are technically interested, it sits in one of these tabs inside your browser cache. So none of your data is transferred anywhere, and you cannot share it because we're very aware that you're dealing with very highly sensitive data that we don't want to touch. Is this answering your question?
I'll just switch back to the mic. Well, I'm personally at this point not kind of concerned about data use or privacy. It's if I create some visualization, what would be the, you know, do I get in touch with you to get a kind of written permission, or we just publish with the
just publish it
created by Vistorian? That's the only kind of issue or question I have.
You create a screenshot, POF, and you go with it. If you would like, what would be really cool if you could cite our small poster here. That would be fantastic, because then we can kind of keep track of who's using it, and we can make cases for funding that helps us for applying for more funding. And it is, yeah, just yeah.
No, thanks. I mean, I think you should actually kind of mention that at the beginning as well. It's an important thing.
Well, yes, it helps sustaining the project, I think. But it's a very good point. I make a note that we put this on the website, that you can use it. There's no, there are no terms or nothing. Just use it and let us know how you use it. In fact, part of the research that we're planning is to hear back from you. We have ethics for this, and there's separate paperwork for this. I say something about this in a second. But other than that, we just use it. Okay, and then more question. Is this all done in the cloud? I suppose there's isn't downloadable version. No, you don't need the downloadable version. You just go to this URL. It should run in most browsers. We haven't tested it in different browsers. We have mainly tested it in Chrome, but it should. I tried it in Firefox this morning. It just works good. You don't need to download anything. It's always the latest version, if you will. And keep in mind that your data sits only in your browser, so no one, it's not going to leave your machine in that sense. It might sound surprising because you think of browsers as something to do in the internet, but there are technical means to store data in your browser as well. Is there a way to download SVG graphics? Yes, there is kind of possible. The problem is that it's something that we honestly gave up because, well, I should say yes and no. For these two visualizations, it is possible. For these two, it is not possible. I'm not sure. I think we disabled the feature because we wanted to have a stable version, but I can look into this. SVG download. It was not working fully functional. It is because of scalability issues that we cannot provide it for all visualizations. Okay. Right, I just killed my network, so I have to restart if I want to demo more. But I think I'm done with my brief demo here. And again, bear with us if you want to know more. Go through all the individual steps again. Now, there's one more thing to say is that, as I said, we're really interested in how you use this. So we have this little function, Vistorian Labs. Marcel will demo this in particular, where if you enable this, it allows you for two things. It enables two things. The one is you get a bookmark function. So basically, the Vistorian Labs is anything beta, is kind of the research corner. And if you enable this, you will get a bookmark function where you can browse through your network, specific time points. You can take bookmarks. You can return to these bookmarks for your analysis, and you can add small little notes to these bookmarks. And on the other side, it enables anonymous tracking. So in this case, again, this is to support our research, and it's completely anonymous. It is basically tracking your individual interactions, like which visualization are you currently having open, how long are you spending on specific visualizations, how much are you interacting, which interactions are you using the time slider, how do you progress through time. So this is all anonymously would be tracked when you enable this Vistorian, and there's also a consent sheet. We have ethics for this because we're interested in analyzing these user logs and understanding where people have problems with the Vistorian. Do they use two views at the same time? Do people find it useful to use two views at the same time? How long do they spend on a visualization? How often do they use it? Do you use it every day? Do you use it one a week? And most important, where do people struggle? So this is really important for us. And we're not tracking any of your data. We're not logging any of your data. No, mouse position, it's not that detailed. It's really just specific events. We're not tracking the other tabs in your browser, of course. We're not scraping anything. We're not screen capturing anything. We're not accessing your camera. There's no eye tracking or nothing involved. There's no software. We don't install anything. It is really just when you click a button, we store an anonymous event in our database. We don't know who you are. We just see, oh, there's someone working with the matrix, and we're like, oh, cool, that's interesting. So again, if you want to support our research, please enable Vistorian Labs so we can collect user data and again, sustain the project, but also conduct research and eventually improve the UI and say, if people don't find that specific feature, if no one uses it, then we need to work on ways to make the UI better and improve and better training, run more workshops, and so on and so on. Formatting data. There are a couple of ways you can format your data. It's all about tables. And we choose to use tables because you can create tables in Excel or in Google Sheets. And then you can export them into CSV files, so comma separate value files. These has specific advantages compared to other formats like GraphML or XML and some of the other tools. They can do these formats, but yeah, it's something we can do in the future. But we want to keep this human readable. So the first type of table that you can import is a link table. And a link table is basically specifying what I've said to you already is one link per row. And you can create a network just out of a link table. The second option is you have a node table. This is really good when you have a genealogy network. For example, I show you later how that works. And you can create a network out of such a node table. And eventually you can combine those two to say in my link table, I store attributes about my links like time and type. And in my node table, I store attributes about my nodes, such as node type or position, and so on and so on. We're focusing on one. Now, what is a link table? I'm just getting a question. I need to go, but thanks for, okay, great. Yes, run, and we put the recording online, which reminds me that I should, okay, yes, am I still recording, actually?
Yes, you are, Ben.
Yes, because yes, okay. I mixed up the buttons. When I wanted to stop the recording, I stopped my screen sharing. That's why I was confused. So we cut all this out. What is my link table? My link table is basically having, again, a row per link in my network. If I have 100 links in my network, I have 100 rows in my table. And one of my columns need to indicate the source and the target of my links, okay? So sender and receiver, or person A, person B, or any kind of other constellation. And that's the minimum I need. So here I have this big table which talks about people, again, in different cities. But then I can also assign the weight of my link, the time when this link is present, the type of this link. In this case, we have some relationship between two people in two different cities, specific amount of money maybe that they gave each other for something. And we can also then associate the locations, the sources. Now, if you have a table or a data set where you don't have all of these information, again, what is important is the source column and the target column. The other ones are optional. But if you have not all positions for all the people, that's fine. You just leave the cell blank, and it will just be ignored by the Vistorian and getting some default link. I'm just getting a question from Anais. Yes, so the Anais is asking if there is a permanent link. That is something that we could do in the future. It is currently not possible because, as I said, your data is not leaving your browser because we don't have a data server, we don't have data protection, we don't have logins, we don't have anything of this kind. And as a research project, we wanted to stay away from all this complexity and not scaring people that they have to set up an account and that we need to protect these data and so on and so on. But we were thinking about lightweight ways to have permalink so that you can actually share these networks with your colleagues. Please ping me next week, and I'm happy to see what exactly you would do, because again, for us, it's important to know in what context people wanted to use this. Again, we don't want to create logins and all these complex things. We wanted to do this as lightweight as possible and seeing what we can do in this range. So I'm interested in what's the minimum requirement that you actually need for your scenario. Back to our tables. So link tables is like so. And then if let's look at the node tables. If you have a genealogy network, for example, it is quite tedious to have one row per relation. There is a bit of a compressed version, which is this node table. For example, we have Bob, and we have his mother, his father, his godfather, and so on, different types of relations eventually. So each of these columns now is not an attribute, but a relation. So we have, if I set this in the Vistorian, basically, if I format my network like this, and I just say, here are my relations, then I get such a genealogy network where I see that here's Bob, and here's the father of Bob. I removed the legend by incident. So yellow means father, this is mother, and then this is probably godfather or so. And that creates your network as well. Now, finding the right format, edge table or link table, it will require a little bit of thinking in the beginning. The simple thing is always when you have a genealogy, go with a single node table. If you have just links and attributes on links, it's a link table. If you have, yes, that's it. I already said that. And if you have attributes on your links and on your nodes, for example, you have different types of nodes and you want to color your nodes or give the nodes different shapes, then you need both a node table where you show the attributes on your nodes and a link table where you mark the attributes on your links. Okay, so then you need the two of them. So that's basically the quick overview over data formatting. You can find, again, all this information on our website. There is a link. It is the Getting Started. We have a couple of videos, and we also have tutorials here. And one of this loading and importing data. So ensuring your data is in the correct format. And it basically walks you through all these tables that I just mentioned to you. Again, there's so many ways you can specify a network and so many different things. Like sometimes you may have, for example, a link that has a start date and an end date. That is something that is currently not supported. We work on this right now. There can only be one time per link, but you will see this can be arbitrarily complex, and time formats and everything is explained on this website. And again, if you run into issues, really just get in touch. We want to help you using this. The tool and work with these networks. Okay, that's it from me, really. This took way longer than I expected.